Hello, hi, and welcome to Red Sky Fuel for Thought, the podcast show from Red Connect that interviews leaders in industry to bring you the latest insight, brightest thinking, and emerging trends in communications and content. I'm your host, Richard Clarke, and I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to this inaugural show. As this is our very first episode, there is really only one leader in industry that could help kick us off, and that is James Wright, Global CEO of Red Connect. In this episode, you will hear James talk about his experience leading a team of comms experts through a global pandemic, why brands need purpose more than ever before, and how brands and sectors can reignite demand for products and services in a post-COVID world. Here we go. I hope you enjoy listening. James, good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, Rich. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Thank you for joining me on Red Sky Fuel for Thought and our inaugural show. Just for listeners' sake, James is actually joining me from New York City, where he lives, and also through the medium of Teams. So there's obviously something that we've all had to get, pretty acquainted with quite quickly over the last few months. I'm going to dive in and then sort of really start with the fact that I almost didn't quite know where to start our conversation today because so much has happened recently, hasn't it? But I thought what might be good is if we actually sort of focused on sort of you and your role as the sort of leader of a global PR collective. I sort of can only assume that this is sort of perhaps the most difficult crisis that you've been faced with, in your career. And it really is a crisis that there is no blueprint or a leader to sort of in terms of helping weather the storm. I just sort of wondered, how have you adapted your leadership style in this time?
Rich, I think we've been living in a time warp as well in the last few months. I can't believe that some of the normalcy that we had over Christmas and then into January, and the fact that I was traveling in different parts of the world only sort of 6 months ago, and everything feels very sort of normal to where we are today. And even though it was January when I'm referring to that time, it actually felt sometimes when I look back on it like it was 2 or 3 years ago. And then in other ways, it feels like it was a couple of weeks ago. So it's kind of been a strange period in that sense. And I get that sort of feeling from a lot of people who kind of are losing what day it is and what week it is, now that we're all camped at home, working from home. I mean, this pandemic has pervaded every part of our lives in every country and every community, and has affected every business and everybody in a different and personal way. And some more than others, and some it may come to them at different times. And so it's been a challenge to work all through that. So a lot of things to navigate within our own business in terms of our people and putting their health and wellness first, ensuring that they feel supported in both their working life, and so helping them work from home, giving them the tools and tricks and technologies that they need to continue to be effective, to also support them and their loved ones, their sort of health and any other kind of issues that they might be going through that sort of has fallen out of what's happened with the global pandemic, and also the other issues that have come to the fore during this time with economic and political uncertainty. The Black Lives Matter movement as well has been a particularly concerning sort of issue that's arisen, and quite rightly so, in terms of how that's impacted and has really captured people's hearts and minds, and it's great to see that that's building momentum now. So that's also been a factor in everything that's happening. And so then you've got the same with your clients. The clients are people too, and they're going through all of those similar feelings and issues of work and personal life and what's going on in society and in their community. And then of course one thing as a leader, you've also got to look after yourself, because you've got to be able to operate. I mean, I spend most of my time right now dealing with people issues, and not necessarily that people are causing issues, but things from how do we get people back into the building and into the offices. How do we support those people that are doing it tough right now with maybe health issues that have happened to them or their family, or other kind of issues like their parenting? How do they continue to be effective if they're managing children at home and homeschooling? So it's kind of a perfect storm of so many issues happening at one time. and you kind of got to know instinctively where to spend your time each day. I have a plan, every week and every day for what I expect my day to look like, and inevitably an hour, 2 hours in, it's kind of it's completely changed, and generally it has been about keeping the wheels turning with our teams, and supporting and helping them through what has been a very challenging situation, and one that doesn't look like it's going away anywhere soon.
Do you think there's a real difference in sort of leadership style from CEOs in this crisis versus other crises like the GFC, for example, in 2008?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of new to being a managing director in 2008. I was young. I was very young. I was 28 years old. Suddenly thrown into this situation, and I learned a lot from that. It was probably a little bit more sort of directly impactful in terms of the economic hit. We made changes almost immediately as things became apparent that this was going to be a recession, and quite a deep one. And I also saw, a lot of things that our clients were doing, that we were doing, that perhaps, I think we've all learnt from. And I think this, what I've seen this time around is a much greater understanding of the empathy required to deal with people when they're going through challenges, when you have to make difficult decisions about the future of the business and the sustainability of the business, when your clients have to do the same, and, treating people with that kind of respect and empathy that they need. I mean, tough decisions have to be made. They need to be made. You need to be able to ensure that the business can still make the ends meet and still sort of continue. And we know that that's just the reality of the situation. But, there are ways in which you can go about that at least are respectful to people when you go through some of those more difficult decisions. And I think that's one of the big differences I've seen. And also, that really stemmed from an economic issue that then had impacts on health and well-being. This is really a health and well-being issue that is then having very big impact on the economy. So that's kind of a different way in which you can, the lens in which you can look at this.
You mentioned there sort of respect and empathy as sort of are key things, particularly sort of, just from a leader perspective in these times. But is that the kind of advice that you've been giving to clients and colleagues when you think about sort of, what the imperatives are in terms of being a leader, and when uncertainty really is sort of the only thing that's sort of certain at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the ultimate test of your character and your leadership, isn't it? What do you stand for? How do you go about doing business and treating people during a time when everybody is under a huge amount of pressure, personally and professionally? And, this is where you stand up as a leader. This is where you prove to your team that you are, you have the skills and talent to be a CEO. And I think that's where you will see, and history will judge a lot of the people that have been in leadership positions, whether they're CEOs or politicians or otherwise. History will tell how well that they've managed that situation. But for me, it's about, making sure that the team feel respected, supported, and the clients feel that we're offering them right kind of advice. I mean, I also think because there's no playbook here, a lot of it is driven by instinct as much as experience. So that's kind of, I mean, we're all dealing with this crisis in real time, so everyone needs to sort of pivot to keep moving forward. Really understand as well that there's a lot more context often to decisions that are being made than otherwise. So I also kind of impress on to our teams and my teams where there's information I can't necessarily share, that's trust in the judgment and the decisions that are being made. A lot of that context can sometimes be lost or can't be communicated for whatever reason. Legal, regulatory or otherwise, whether that's the fact that some people are taking some leave of absences and you can't explain why that is, or the fact that you having to make changes in the business, and again there might be reasons that you can't share with everyone as to why those decisions are being made.
Just change topic now and talk a little bit about brand purpose and CSR. And I think, if there's one thing this crisis has shown for brands is that silence is definitely not golden. What's been really interesting to observe from the beginning is how media and consumers have actively been looking at how brands and companies have responded to this crisis. So I sort of first wanted to ask you, are there any brand behaviours that have really sort of caught your attention?
I've loved the fact that so many brands and organisations have really stepped up to play a meaningful role in their communities and societies, whether it's been, changing production lines to create healthcare supplies, moving from making alcohol spirits to hand sanitizers to giving away free hotel rooms and frontline or any sort of healthcare worker that's playing a key role. That's been fantastic to watch. I mean, I've loved seeing that, and I think that has given me a huge amount of respect for a lot of these organizations. And even if it's just a small role, as in using your own social channels to share information around what you should do in terms of personal hygiene, wear a mask, wash your hands. You've seen that also with many celebrities, personalities, influencers doing the same thing. I think it's really heartening to see that people can come together like that. And, and that's, I think, had a huge difference. And in many ways, it's been businesses that have stepped up to the plate to almost sort of drive the public health message in a more consistent way than perhaps we've seen from politicians. And certainly I would say that that's true in the US. But I think, ultimately for a lot of organizations, and I agree with you that it isn't about silence right now. It's about, standing up for the purpose of your organization. And we've heard a lot in recent years around having a purpose beyond profit. Well, this right now, this moment in time is the ultimate test of whether that is indeed the case, whether you actually walk the walk around that. And so this goes, way beyond what's happening here and now, but this is going to set you up for the future. And I think that, consumers have a long memory. People have a long memory of, organizations, people that do, that don't do the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
So, this acceleration towards a human brand where, you act as you would expect somebody in the community with those kind of skills and access to act. So, how can you play a role has been a big question in every boardroom, I think. And those people that have said yes and then gone about their business by supporting and doing what's required. And like I say, that can manifest itself in many different ways, fundraising, awareness raising, or as I say, those people that have used their products or strategic capability to sort of help with the response to the pandemic. As I think it's been fantastic to see.
And do you think so? You were just talking there about sort of, brands walking the walk, standing up, sort of, defining their role through this crisis. Have you then seen a difference in sort of how the media have been sort of reporting on, things like brand CSR?
Because for so long, the single sort of story is the pandemic, as in like every story you watch and read or learnt about in any of your feeds was sort of told with a pandemic lens. That those stories have come to the fore and been again an inspiration to other brands and other organizations to sort of inspire them to want to do more themselves. So that's been great. I mean, you've also seen a move back to more traditional media and communications. I mean, we're all working from home right now. Everyone's got CNN or BBC World or Fox in the background, whatever it is that you are. That we're taking more. We're consuming more of that kind of traditional media, listening to the radio, reading the newspapers, maybe not in newspaper format, but on our iPads or on our tablets. And I think, that's where we're turning back to that kind of those sort of institutions that are there to provide the information that we need to make smart decisions about our own lives, but also to learn about what is the scale and response to this crisis. And it is a crisis. So getting your organization and brand to the fore there, it's actually been some of the good news stories where you've seen those responses, and also the organizations who are also going out there and playing a role in thanking those people who are at the front line. That's also been fantastic to see too, and the whole community come together. So I think everybody can find their voice in this story at the right time, and providing you do it with some balance and with some you're cognizant of how you might come across, then I think and you've seen that there's been a lot of positive messages and a lot of positive energy around those organizations and brands that have played a big role.
So I guess the question then perhaps on everyone's lips really is, how do you think brands and companies can strike the balance between purpose and profit in the future?
Well, I think it's been about putting people first. And so that's what we've seen. So how do you put your stakeholders first beyond your shareholders? And again, that's part of that purpose beyond profit has been this shift from, shareholder being the key and number one sort of audience and stakeholder, to actually looking at all of the stakeholders and looking at how your organization is bringing value to them, and how they can also bring value to you. So that's been a big shift, and it's not true of every brand and organizations. And of course, there's also been some poorer examples of where perhaps organizations have done the wrong thing. It's also been good to see, though, actually, when that's happened, that they've kind of actually pulled a U-turn or changed their sort of course quite quickly, based on the reaction of usually kind of internal audiences, but external factors too. So I think you just need that integrity around what you're planning to do, and to understand that this isn't about looking at the short term. This isn't about just getting through each month to hit a profitability number. It's about actually, what is the bigger picture here? What will your organization look like in a year or 2 years time, when hopefully we're out of this kind of crisis situation with the pandemic, and more in a situation where it's being properly controlled and managed.
The third and final topic I wanted to chat to you about is how brands, sectors, non-profits can stimulate demand as lockdown measures are either easing, in certain parts, like for example where I am in the UK, it's slowly but surely being led by England, where lockdown measures are easing, or indeed in certain parts of the world being put back in place, like where you are in America. Although I'm not sure what the latest situation in New York is, but certainly California sounds, that it's going back into shelter-in-place orders. So I was just wondering, if you look at some of the hardest hit sectors like live experiences, for example, summer has been cancelled, hasn't it? Really, if you think about festivals. The usual calendar of outdoor activities or live experiences this year has it's been pretty non-existent, including sport, as well. What can those sectors do to try and instill confidence and actually really try and just get some traction going?
I mean, everyone's got to innovate right now. Got to think differently about how they go about their work and their business. And of course, those key areas that have been hit, greatly. I mean, you talk about those people in live events and not-for-profits, but great deal of the retail sector, has changed. Will we ever see a return to shopping malls in the way that we've seen them before? Are we gonna? How is the travel and tourism sector gonna bounce back, particularly if certain sectors of society or age groups feel particularly uncomfortable about traveling? Particularly then to countries that are harder hit, where perhaps they don't have the same level of healthcare and technology to support a managing of the situation, all the way through to the knock-on effect, which of people not having enough money, that they're not spending it in certain areas. And a big question mark here in the US is the impact on education, because of if you can't afford to send your kids to college, now that becomes a bigger issue that will last for a decade and beyond. So and then of course we talked about small businesses earlier, Richard, and of course they're very, very badly hit. So how do you, in each of those areas, think doing things differently? And virtual events have become this something that we've seen a lot more of, and people innovating and accelerating more towards making those virtual events more engaging. I know that, for example, in sports and in music, and as part of our ownership, we're owned by Vivendi, and we do a lot of work in entertainment through Canal Plus and the Universal Music Group's the world's biggest music label. We're looking at the likes of how virtual reality. We were exploring virtual reality in terms of live events, and so how do we actually embrace that in a bigger way in this period of time? And then when we come out of it the other end, do we go back to the way that events were traditionally put on, or is it actually this blend of physical and virtual, and this emergence of the virtual reality of things? So how can things be partly physical and partly virtual. So I think everyone's got to think very much kind of with an open mind about how everything's going to look. I think the not-for-profit sector is particularly challenging, and actually, if you take it back a step even further, where there's recent research that's come out from UNICEF and WHO about all of the other conditions and diseases that perhaps haven't had the same level of money and attention in the last 6 months. You've seen kind of a lot of again issues with other conditions and diseases kind of coming back in a bigger way because we haven't given them enough attention, or indeed kids not getting immunized from certain diseases as well. So but for not-for-profits, how do you make yourself relevant? And I think you really need to have a base of very strong a strong community that you can reach out to, who understand your organization, understand what you're trying to do, and will support you through this time. It's hard to go out and actually get anyone else to really give you the attention that you need. But some organizations will still need to do that to be able to be sustainable going forward. So how do they go about that? There's no silver bullet, but I think you've got to try different things and be willing to try new things, to try and seek new awareness and fundraising avenues. And I'm working with a few organizations right now who are doing just that, and they're finding their own route into it. Working with an organization that is focusing on mental health and mental fitness, and that's a huge issue right now with the anxiety and issues that people are facing through both the pandemic and the racial inequality that we are seeing rise to the surface right now, and obviously the economic and social uncertainty that comes with that, and that's their route into it. And of course, if we're going to see a rise in the number of suicides, then that is that's one suicide is too much from my point of view. So they've got a role to play, and that's their kind of route into this. And so I think you've got to try and find that route into getting into people's mindsets about the importance of your cause and your organization. Of course, a lot of those not-for-profits as well rely on physical events. I mean, you see the impact that the London Marathon has had on the UK non-for-profit sector, which was huge. It's a huge fundraiser for that, for many charities. So you think about all of those sporting events that happen like that, or the world's biggest tea mornings that some of the cancer organisations undertake. So all of those are currently off the table. Well, how do you pivot and do something else that's going to create kind of similar levels of fundraising, or any level of fundraising, frankly, right now? So look, it's a challenge for everybody that we're all going through, and I think it's important to get the right support and counsel around you to advise you as you're moving through.
Thinking again about what impact or the impact that the pandemic has had on influencers specifically, and we've talked quite a bit today about the role of brands, businesses, companies, in society today, their contribution to the cause, and sort of what the future looks like. I think it's also it's really interesting to look at how this crisis has impacted the influencer industry. The influencers have literally been influenced or become influenced, so that they are those that have become influenced overnight as a result of this. What do you think? What's your view on sort of what that influencer model of the future looks like going forward?
I mean, we've always had influencers in the sense that we've always used talent and people of profile to push a message, for decades now. And since sort of the emergence of social media in its more contemporary form in the last decade and a little bit more, they've certainly become a much more powerful tool to be used in the marketing mix, but it was still very much at its infancy in the last sort of decade of how they were going to be used, and probably more so in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, those people who've built profiles. I think that there's a few components that I think we've seen. One is that they're really understanding their role in a community in a more meaningful way than just selling the latest fashion item, but actually being able to play a role as part of that, almost as a brand, to be able to push the public information and health messaging that we've seen many of them do, as well as actually also supporting some of those. We talked about not-for-profits before. I've seen some of them actually also advocating for the charities and not-for-profits that they support. And so that's been important to see too. They, I think, have grown up a lot during this time too, and I think that that's where those messages have become much more mature in what I've seen. And I think it's a good thing. It's made people also think about who are their audience and what are they expecting them to do during this period of time, and also for brands who are utilizing them, that they're much more cognizant and aware of and policing who, as an influencer, they're activating on behalf of their brand. Mm-hmm. And also, I think I've just been very buoyed as well by the number of people though that have really come to the table off their own bats, really, to talk about what's required in society today to try and control and manage this problem.
And if you think about social media, it's just what you mentioned, human connection. I mean, it's basically gone back to the original purpose of social media, which was human connection, albeit online.
Yeah, that's right. And people whose I think, and I don't necessarily have the research back. So I'm sort of talking from my own perspective and what I've seen. Mm-hmm. But it's like brands are really thinking about what they're posting. I think people are too. I think they're really thinking about what are people wanting to see and hear from me right now. Mm-hmm. And I think you still need a bit of that, silliness and funness that we see, because you need a bit of that distraction. But also mm-hmm. people like taking to social media with more purpose and thoughtfulness around what they're doing, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah. And then I also just wanted to ask, it's probably a fairly broad question, but based on where we are and sort of and where we've been, do you think there will be, or indeed already are, winners and losers from this crisis?
I think that the healthcare and pharma sectors continue to perform throughout through the COVID-19 crisis, and that will continue. You've seen many parts of the tech and e-commerce sector do very, very well too, particularly if your agency is skewed into those areas, you'd probably be better placed. Content and social has held itself very steady too, particularly with more B2B clients looking to embrace that in a bigger way. But as in an economic downturn, you will also see the likes of real estate, travel and tourism, retail, small business, not-for-profit suffer. And then, of course, there's a knock-on effect into other sectors like education, which we talked about before too. So there's always going to be those people that or those organisations that do better or not. I think the interesting part will be in a few years' time when we look back at our leaders and our society and looking at who the winners and losers were there. It'd be great to do sort of a take on what society thinks right now to what they think about in 5 years' time when we look back at this very unique time in our history.
Well, James, all good things must come to an end. It was an absolute pleasure having you as our very first leader in industry and Red Sky Fuel for Thought. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
You're very welcome.
Well, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening to the inaugural Red Sky Fuel for Thought podcast show. See you again soon for more of the latest comms insight from the team at Red Connect.